All right, everyone. Welcome to afternoon session, and we come to the panel discussion. The name is the Transformation of Identity and Access Management. As you can see, I have two amazing panel members already there. We have Amol, partner enterprise service from CrucialLogics, and we have Joseph from Microsoft. Joseph is a technical specialist, security, compliance, and identity. So before we start our panel discussion, oh, by the way, I'm Bryan, Bryan Lee, so I will be the panel moderator. Before we start the panel discussion, I will give our panel members a chance to quickly do a self-introduction, maybe 30 seconds. All right, so Amol, you want to start?
Sure, yeah, I can start. My name is Amol Joshi. I'm a partner here at CrucialLogics. We are a Microsoft security firm. We focus on ensuring that our clients are secure using native Microsoft technologies. Building zero trust environments using all the Microsoft features that they have to offer. Optimizing licensing. One of the big things that we do is optimizing licensing while increasing the security posture for our clients.
Excellent. Thank you, Amol. Joseph?
Yeah, hey everyone, Joseph Griffin here. I am a technical specialist, as Brian had mentioned. My focus is around the security, compliance, identity side of the house. This is on the modern work side focus with some of the Azure side as well. The Defenders, the Intunes, the Azure Active Directory. Look forward to having this panel.
Excellent. All right, so my job will be more like a facilitator to ask questions. And also I encourage people online to submit your questions. So I will have opportunity to ask on behalf of you as well. All right, so since our topic for this panel is identity and access management, and specifically the transformation, what's new in identity and access management. So before we talk about all those things, let's understand why IAM is so important, especially during today's evolving threat landscape. What kind of role IAM is playing for this landscape? So our panel members, feel free to jump in.
I can go first, right? So
Sounds good.
I always say to people that when the bad actors are trying to breach you, right? If you ask this question to 9 out of 10 people, I bet they'll get it wrong. When the bad actors are trying to breach you, what are they after? And generally, people will answer, "Oh, they're after your data, crown jewels, whatever, private information," right? No, what they're after is first identity. So as soon as your identity falls, everything else falls, right? So that's the reason why identity and access management is important, because that is the one thing that every organization should be safeguarding is identities, right? Sorry, Joseph.
No, absolutely. I'm right there
Yeah.
with you. I mean, as things have kind of evolved, right, with a huge focus around zero trust and, COVID changed everything. We all know that. But having people pulled from the office, they're no longer behind the DMZ, behind the
Right.
firewall. You really have that core identity that you have to protect, right? So what kind of defenses can you put around the identity to stop, incidents, breaches, as well as with that identity, over access, over privileging those users as well, just in case there is some sort of incident inside the environment they don't have these keys to the kingdom, if you want to think of it that way.
Excellent. So sounds like identity is like a key, we call it a perimeter, right? So
That's right.
once they get that, you kind of the bad guys can enter the environment and then do whatever they want. All right.
Absolutely.
Okay, so my next question really is, I think during the cloud transformation, and so a lot of things kind of moving towards like from a traditional network security to the identity security.
Mhm.
So can you elaborate a little bit more the impact of cloud computing related to identity? And maybe later we can also talk a little bit about multi-cloud, so not just one cloud, right? So
Right.
if you can give us some insights about this area.
Yeah, I'll take this one because you were the first time last time. So, I
Yeah.
mean, cloud computing, digital transformation, it's really changed everything, right? So, not only are you having to maintain these users, you also need to be scalable and flexible, right? your user base changes are going to be changing constantly. New users, what access do they need? What authentication mechanisms are in place right now so that they can access those resources, as well as on top of doing that, starting to streamline that user provisioning. They need to be able to authenticate and have the authorization processes in place, all while trying to reduce the complexity that's involved with, with these new digital transformations, the new digital media, trying to access all this information. And of course, the cloud computing being a big component of it, right? Being able to kick up, even something like a Windows 365 device, right? Being able to go through and actually utilize these computing resources and still being able to verify who they are. There's so much moving pieces with the digital transformation and cloud computing. And at the core of it, it's how the identity is going to be accessing them and making sure that they are who they say they are, of course, right? Always verify who they are, but also make sure that the security plays are in place for your environment and make sure that the end user experience isn't really defeated, right? They need to have a good experience. Otherwise, they're not going to be happy and they're not going to be able to utilize it as often.
Wonderful. That very important is actually the fundamental elements for the cloud's computing is identity. And how do you manage identities, secure them is a great impact to the cloud computing. All right, Amol, what's your thoughts about this?
No, absolutely. The fundamental elements is identity. I mean, if you look at the traditional data center environment, you may have had to protect, a handful of identities because you were behind a firewall, right? With cloud, now your entire organization is exposed. So, I always say to people that if you are going to move your organization to the cloud and not take the proper precautions to harden the cloud, and the identities in the cloud, then there's no point in you moving to the cloud. You're more secure on-prem, right? At the end of the day, this whole verifying identities, per transaction, I think, is the most important way. So not only do you need policies and procedures and rules in place to stop the identities from falling into wrong hands, right? But you also need ways to verify it so that every time someone's trying to log in, they need to prove to you they are who they say they are, right? It goes for your devices, it goes for your users, it goes for your mobile phones. Like everything has an identity tied to it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And so obviously the identity is so important to the cloud. And but what if I have many clouds? It may not be just the one cloud. So what's your suggestion for managing identity across multi-cloud environments?
And I can take that one, right? You may have multiple clouds for whatever reason, right? In terms of security, consolidation is always better, but you may have multiple clouds for business reasons, but you shouldn't have multiple identity brokers, right? You should, consolidate on that identity broker. And majority of the clouds, and I have clients now that would actually reject a third-party cloud provider because they can't integrate into Azure AD, right? So, really there should only be one identity broker, right? One place where the identity is controlled from, one place where you have all the policies for the identity. So that way you can control multiple cloud, multiple SaaS environments, through a single pane of glass, and then have your single sign-ons and, all the, password, hash sharings or whatnot between those, but it has to still come back to a consolidated identity broker.
Yeah, and I mean, I echo that, right? Implementing that one identity and then setting up, single sign-on into those other environments, right? It goes back to that user experience. You don't necessarily want to have to remember all of these different user accounts and everything like that. And there are tools out there that can also help you. I mean, even with our permissions management, utilizing what they call the permission creep index, right? Letting you verify, your over-provisioned users, maybe they're not utilizing those permissions inside those environments. And people are just having those over permissions, right? We're talking about that zero trust and the just in time, making sure that they're not having access to things that maybe they don't necessarily need, or making sure that if they are set up as that user role, that maybe they don't always need it, right? And then on top of it, to build on Amol's foundation that he built so well, the visibility and auditing, right? Being able to get the visibility into who is reaching out to those services, who is accessing those services, and making sure that you're auditing those identities and making sure that you're monitoring those trails to see, okay, if they are accessing these. Once again, better to have the single source of truth. If you don't, though, being able to visibly monitor and audit them so that you know who's accessing them, what resources, have they verified who they are, that's going to be a huge component of that multi-cloud environment.
Absolutely.
All right. So the consensus is, first of all, we need to have a single version of truth, right? So
Correct.
Yeah,
you need to
source of truth.
manage from one place rather than you have everywhere. Otherwise, especially for large organization, that will be a lot of inconsistent and a nightmare to connect. All right. All right. So that's about the cloud. Let's switch the gear a little bit. So look at from the user side. So because identity is, to me, is different from many other things. Is really you have a user experience involved as well. It's not like just technology, you just add whatever fancy things. You also need to consider the user experience. Especially nowadays, many people work from home, remote work, all those things, right? So what's your suggestion for identity management for hybrid workplace?
Yeah, and I mean, hybrid is one of the biggest things right now. Letting the users access their resources in an easy fashion is one of the biggest parts of it, right? We talk with
Okay.
customers constantly. They have these resources. These resources could be, SaaS applications. They can also be on-premise access, and they're not always working from the environment, right? So at some point, there's going to be a risk that they have to assume, right? So creating these risk policies around it and deciding on really what kind of applications you want them to be able to access when they are remote. I, for one, when I came on, I'm 100% remote. So my life cycle has been, stay here, don't go into the office and work from here. So how can I access the data, right? And so making sure that not only is the user experience really nice, right? Modern authentication into it, not utilizing the VPN to access every single resource is a huge thing. Setting up single sign-on and passwordless technology, right? Giving you that extra level of security on your side while at the same time improving the end user experience. No longer having to remember all those passwords and everything like that. And really kind of keeping that streamlined, right? Letting them access as many resources as they can via modern authentication. Letting them, go passwordless where they just sign in and they can single sign on to everything without having to go through and remember all of this stuff. So really focusing on the end user experience. And then maybe if they are at the office, right, maybe setting up different conditional access policies, something maybe around, trusted IP addresses. Maybe they have less authentication that they have to go through based on your own security standards and everything like that. Well, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on it too.
You know what? You touched on the point at the very end that I was going to bring on, which is conditional access policies are important, right? When it comes time for user experience around identity, it actually has to tie in with your device management policies as well. Because where are users accessing their data in a hybrid environment from? It's from their devices, right? Either their laptop computers or mobile phones or whatnot. So if your identity provider knows which devices users are accessing from, and they're compliant and they are in a geographic location of your choice and approval, right? Then there needs to be certain I wouldn't call it discounts, that's a wrong word, but certain conditions that are automatically met so then you don't throw in as many exceptions for the user to access data. Because you know what? They've gone through the checks inherently, as soon as they logged into their device. Now, if that condition changes and the user goes, hey, I'm no longer working from Toronto, I'm going to go over to Punta Cana and work from Punta Cana, at that point you need to re-authenticate the user just to verify, right? So your token lengths matter at that point, right? How you authenticate matters. Seamless sign-on is, there's single sign-on and there's seamless sign-on, right? Seamless sign-on is important. How do you integrate applications to pick up the token that's already been approved on your computer is a big part of user experience as well. But really, it all ties back down. So every time I see a bad user experience when it comes to identity, it's because the devices haven't been managed and configured correctly, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand. I know we're talking about identity, but it also has to, we also have to talk about the end user computing devices and how it ties into the identity.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you guys brought that conditional access things, right? So as Amol also mentioned, it sounds like we're talking about identity, but the identity actually working with many elements, right? So
Correct.
like devices, your location, like your user itself, or
IP
maybe
addresses.
operating
Yep.
system, application systems. So
Absolutely.
identity really is kind of like a something glue everything together as
Yes.
an access point, right? So that's why
Yeah,
it's so important.
absolutely.
Okay, great. And another question I have really is nowadays the industry is adopting the zero trust security model, right? So security model. And we had a couple of sessions before panel discussion also talk about zero trust. So I'd like to get your insights about what role does identity or IAM play during this zero trust implementation?
I
I can go
mean,
first.
yeah, yeah,
Sure.
like it's a huge component of it. So go ahead.
I think it is the important component of it, right? Like, zero trust model cannot be built out without your identity, right? Like it really is it's fundamentally important. Like identity is fundamentally important to zero trust. You cannot move, you cannot remove identity from zero trust because you're not going to get zero trust. Who are you trusting at the end of the day, right? In a zero trust environment. So, again, putting in gates to ensure and checkpoints to ensure that whoever is accessing the data is who they say they are, multi-factor authentication, conditional access, their location, right? All that factors into, device state, all that factors into your zero trust environment. And identity is probably the number one consideration in your zero trust environment.
Yeah, and zero trust, I mean, what is at the end of the day? It's trust nobody, verify explicitly. You need
Right.
to set up all of these measures around it, right? And with identity, I mean, it's the conditional access policies, it's the MFA, it's the modern authentication, it's the environment. You're there to protect that identity, right? And really make sure that they are who they say they are, utilizing that whole signals, the user entity behavior and analytics around it, right? Maybe even looking at, okay, your signal's off. You normally are logging in from here. You need to do a stronger
Yeah.
authentication in there, even all the way up to like a FIDO key, right? Something like that, right? Making sure that, as Amal said, that device, it's compliant based on your compliance policies and it's your typical logins to it. And then keep it as a least privilege, utilizing things such as PIM and PAM, right? That privileged identity management. Maybe you don't always need that role. You have to go through an approval process. That way, if your identity is breached or you can't get the signals, they don't have, we'll say at the worst part, a global admin privilege inside the environment. But I would say at the core of it, zero trust is identity focused. It's really what is the core functionality of it.
All right. So that's why identity nowadays becomes so important, almost like a center of the security, right? So
That's right.
you need a security, first you need identity secured. So that's a probably reason also because the zero trust model. So speaking of this one, because traditionally, when people think about identity or access management, probably only think about, okay, I have a user ID, password, maybe add a multi-factor authentication,
Mhm.
then I can get in, then the access maybe a couple of permissions. But I think nowadays we have expand this concept a lot. There are many areas on top of those things. For example, identity governance, right? So you guys already touched on several elements of identity governance. For example, like a privilege management, like life cycle management, access reviews, all those are the things, right? So can you elaborate a little bit more about the importance and the best practice for identity governance?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as Mal pointed out earlier, identity is more than just the user, right? But you really need to identify the users, the resources, what solutions, devices, application services that these identities need to access to, right? From there, you'll have an understanding of the overall picture. You're going to have to then map out different roles and situations for that solution, right? Because not everyone's going to have the same authentication and to access this, or doesn't have to access the same resources. And some might be more proprietary or more secure. And so starting to implement things focused around the PIM, where they have to go through and elevate privileges. Maybe instead of letting them access things from a remote location, keeping it focused more in where you're actually at the office and the trusted IP address, and you've authenticated it, and you use that strong authentication in there as well. And one of the things that I think can change kind of the focus of it is plan for future and growth, right? It's where you at currently is trying to build up the IAM architecture, but where do you plan on being in the future? Do you plan on, decommissioning on-premise servers, and then you're wanting to do modern authentication into there? And as that starts to grow, it gives you an understanding of where you're at now, where you'd like to be in the near, and where you'd like to be in the future, right? We'll call it the now near future. And then from there, of course, you're getting the users into the, provisioning, and how these users get provisioned changes whoever you're working with. Some are doing HR provisioning in and everything like that, and then they're creating those groups. So then you can go through things with like the lifecycle workflows, creating the workflows for either onboarding or even pre-provisioning and setting up termination. But I would say that the identity governance is a really large strategy that really you need to identify the whole scope of it. It helps you get a good understanding, then start to map out the different entities that everyone's going to be working with, and then planning for that future growth.
Wonderful. Yeah, Amol? Yeah.
Joseph said it really well. I mean, only thing that I'll add to it is what will simplify your identity governance is something that we touched on, a few minutes ago, which is a single identity broker, right? When where it becomes hairy is now you have to manage multiple identities. So if like a user leaves, I'd rather just go to Azure AD and then block that user. So that user is blocked not only on Office 365, but the user is also now blocked on Salesforce or any other third-party solutions that you're using, right? That is important. Doing regular reviews is either through a automated process like Joseph mentioned, or manually is important as well. Because I've been a big proponent. I used to be a IT auditor back in the day, right? If you catch something in audit, it's already too late, right? So, really, you definitely need to look at it and go, how can I have an identity governance process, however simplistic it may be, so that we can review it periodically, right? At least monthly, I would say. If you don't have an automated process, at least have your managed service provider or, your IT team, present to you the privileged users, the lower privileged users, and the people that are still within the company, and go through it on a monthly basis, right?
Use those access reviews. It's
Access
perfect. Yeah,
reviews,
use your
exactly,
access reviews and your access packages. Absolutely.
absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. So otherwise, because especially may not be just a large organization, even for medium or small organization, your privilege or permission everywhere, right?
Yeah,
It's not like you only have a couple of people, then that's fine. But you actually
Yep.
use that for everywhere. So you
correct.
have to have like a really good identity governance process
Right.
to govern all those things.
And just one last thing, separate your regular user from your admin user. So don't use the same user for both purposes, right? I mean, it's very
Yeah,
simplistic. I know it's trivial, but I still see that a lot where the
And guest
CEO of the
users.
company still has global admin rights, rather than creating an ADM account. So
that's so true.
yeah,
So if you have like a access or like an owner or like a global admin account, once that falls to bad guys' hands, they own your system,
Yeah,
right?
that's
So
it. Absolutely.
domain dominance.
Yeah,
yeah. So because especially on cloud, because how do you differentiate you and the bad guys? Really is your privilege. Okay, great. And speaking of, I think Joseph touched on the future, right? So especially for identity governance, also you need to consider the future needs, the business. And back to IAM, we also need to look at current and the future. Right. So recently industry has a lot of change, right? So especially AI, machine learning, chat GPT, all those sounds like all of a sudden there's a lot of revolutionary kind of technologies coming. So what do you see kind of emerging trends or technologies related to IAM?
Yeah, and I mean, I'll get a kickstart. I mean, AI is everywhere, right? I mean, especially on the Microsoft side, right? I guarantee everyone's heard at least of the term Copilot, and Copilot's getting added to everything, right? AI can start to do things for your defense that you can start to implement pretty quickly, right? So where it's going to automate and respond to those risk levels. And there's always going to be something like called acceptable risk inside your environment, even when you're going through, we'll say, the conditional access policies. When you're looking at those conditions and the user risk, you can actually choose like low, medium, high. Obviously, with high risk being something that you probably wouldn't necessarily want them to have access to things, right? But utilizing things to automatically respond to that, where you've kind of gone through and created some of those things, and it's looking at the whole user profile. It's like, you have a high risk. What do we do automatically? Well, you need to do this, this, and this based on what you've determined in your conditional access policy. Utilizing things like anomaly detection, right? It's going to look at that user behavior and decide, okay, something's not right. You need to go through these extra steps. Or even from there, using things like Sentinel, where it can go through and look at some of the identity and say, okay, this was happening. This is the MITRE technique. These are the users involved with it. What do you need to do to respond to it, right? And starting to go through and really looking at what kinds of things can happen in your environment if they do get access to those identities, including insider risk, right? So making sure that you're covering yourself with those identities, making sure that not everyone's going to be able to have access to everything that they could have without going through those privileged identities. And at the same time, making sure that those anomaly detections and risk levels you've taken into consideration in your environment and taking a look at kind of that acceptable risk in the environment as well.
All right, wonderful. Amol, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, like Joseph said, AI is everywhere. I see the future of AI being, picking out anomalies in access and access management, or picking out, permission changes and stuff like that, and in a real-time basis, rather than notifying it, reversing it back to what it should be, right? So hopefully, it comes to a point where the monitoring and actioning of that, event becomes a seamless activity, right?
Excellent. And so we talk quite a lot about how to apply AI to the technology side, the defense side. Um, as you know, identity and access management, one of the uniqueness about this one is also involve users, right? So it's not like just technical people work on that one. So how do you educate your end users the best practice, right? So they may not be like tech savvy or know all those terminologies, but how do you kind of involve them in this security management?
To me, it's security awareness training. I mean, I do a bunch of those for our clients, right? It's important for them. It's important to show what happens if, certain things aren't followed, right? Yeah, you could have policies in place and things like that, but there's always ways to get around policies. If people want to just remember passwords and just reuse the same password, adding one, two, three, whatever in front of it, just incrementally, there's ways to get around that. The policies that you put in place, right? Otherwise it becomes so stringent that the users will complain saying it's way too stringent. So, security awareness is very, very important. Showing them what the result of lack of security or lack of diligence may be, not only for the company but for their personal careers as well, right? Like, we have examples of people that were terminated because they fell victim to a phishing scam, right? So, I think it's important to educate people on how bad can it be if everyone doesn't pay attention.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right there, right? That security awareness training, I think a lot of the time is you have to let them know why you're doing certain things, right? Why you're increasing the security. They might not have that full understanding on, oh yeah, maybe I am accessing this proprietary data that I should probably be more authenticated into there. And really looking at an adoption, right? Sometimes things that are more secure can be more convenient for the end user. I'm going to go back to like Windows Hello, right? Where it's passwordless, right? That's more secure, but to the end user, they think it's easier, right? They just smile at their computer, right? And they're in. And all of a sudden you have a more you have a more secure configuration, and they're more secure accessing the resources. But to them, they think it's an easier thing to do. So of course, security awareness training. I mean, the training comes through with like, we'll say defender for office with the phishing campaigns. But I mean, I've even fallen for some of the training ones back in the day before I came IT,
Yeah.
and use it as a learning experience. Let users know, hey, this is why we need to do this. We need to implement this because if you were to click on this, this is what can happen, right? Just teach them how to look out for certain things. And then, of course, come up with that adoption program, right? Staged rollouts are a huge component of it, and kind of encouraging people to encourage other people to do it on the same team, I think is a good way of handling it.
Excellent. So really, on one side, you need to show them what could happen, right? So if this is, if you're doing this way, then what could happen? For that purpose, you may also have like a simulation, the exercise phishing campaign, which Microsoft also has a solution, right? So embedded in the Microsoft 365 Defender, all those like
Yeah.
so those one. On the other side, it really is to involve them, right? So it's not like you just let them fly by themselves. You involve them and also educate them.
Correct.
And let's spin that topic a little bit. As we all know, in cybersecurity, talent shortage is a big problem, right? So we don't have enough resource to work on. And it's specifically for identity side. Personally, I also involved with quite a lot of from HR point of view, they need the identity specialist, or it doesn't matter which job title, maybe architect, maybe a specialist, maybe. But generally speaking, we need more people in identity field. But on the other side, from education point of view, a lot of people feel there's a gap, right? So they don't have a practical experience required by organizations. So how do you see to bridge this gap from talent point of view?
Yeah, and I mean, I would say I was kind of there during part of that gap too, right? When I went to school, and this was like 2017 when I graduated, it was new for cybersecurity, right? And then all of a sudden, cybersecurity became necessary. It used to kind of be like this niche thing that you might have security, they're usually contractors. And then all of a sudden, it's like everybody needs cybersecurity. So it built this giant gap for it. And I mean, you see people that are just interested in it. I mean, kind of getting people excited about the things that can be blocked with identity, right? And how they can actually utilize these, you know, security mechanisms to really stop, right? It does go beyond just identity, where you're just looking at like risky users and these logs and everything like that. It can go all the way down to things like Mimikatz and learning how to block those that are going to be learning how to do password attacks and utilizing things like that, and getting people to kind of see that side of the house. I think will start to bring more people to have an identity focused and we'll say like a defense side on the blue team, we'll say. It starts to kind of intrigue their interest and look at the security people, look at the people that are currently doing your Active Directory, get them interested in how these things can be defended against. And that's probably a good way to kind of to bring them in that kind of close quarters for the identity.
Excellent. Amol, you have anything to add?
You know, my view on it would is a little bit different because I'm looking at it from a business owner perspective, right? Because I face that gap day in and day out, right? You know, how do you bridge that gap between technology people and security professionals, right? You know, one is training people internally, right? There's tons of courses that even Microsoft offers, designations and things like that to bridge that gap, right? But we need to stop thinking about you know, hiring people just in the context of Canada. You know, you're talking about 33 million people versus with hybrid workforce, you can go 7 billion people across the world, right? You know, there are many ways to secure your remote employees and get them to produce amazing value for the organization. So rather than just looking at it saying, oh yeah, our talent pool is 33 million people, let's start looking at our talent pool as 7 billion people, and then that bridge or the gap would be minimized because now you can choose from Australia, England, Germany. I don't know. You can go anywhere in Africa or India. Like really, there are great talented people out there that are doing amazing stuff, and we just need to utilize that global power.
All right, cool. And all right, so we cover quite a lot of topics so far. We start from the why we need the role of IAM as a general to cybersecurity, Then coming to specific like cloud and remote work or hybrid workforce. Then we touched on zero trust security, the user experience, identity governance, and emerging technologies, and also talent development, user education. We touched quite many areas about identity. If you can wrap it up, right? So, because we have so many things can pay attention to, but if you can, let's say within short period of time, if you can only recommend one thing, I know there's so many things. What's your top kind of a suggestion to our audience today?
I'll go first.
Go ahead.
Identity broker consolidation, right? Like, make sure that you're consolidating your identity so that you can have common policies for your entire organization. Now take that and then tie it into all your other governance strategies, including devices and mobile devices, or information governance on your storages and things like that. So, having that single source of identity is probably my number one recommendation. So get rid of all the clutter, consolidate on one thing and try and tie that into all your workloads.
All right.
Absolutely.
So
And I
back
think
to
that'll be a
our
good one.
single version of truth and a
That's right.
single pane of glass or whatever control panel, or you can call it. But the key is to simplify it and make that as a one you pay attention, you focus on. All right, cool. Like Joseph?
Yeah, and I mean, outside that single pane of glass, because I do think that's probably the most important. I would say that the other one that I would say is really important is just looking at zero trust, right? Starting to look at that zero trust architecture. If you haven't taken into consideration that the identity being the new security focal point and needing to verify and verify explicitly that they are who they say they are, that's going to be the biggest component of it, right? Starting to migrate from the older way of firewall, DMZ inside the environment, VPN in, really focusing on keeping that identity secure in whatever you need to do to keep the identity secure. That single pane of glass being a huge component of it, because then you're only focusing on that one with those policies, the conditional access, the different profiles and behaviors that are coming in around that one. So I would say keep it focused around the zero trust mentality.
Excellent. So you need this from technology or infrastructure wise, you need to have this a single like version of truth. On the other side, you need to select a sound like a framework or model like zero trust, right? So combine those two things. I will add one more is people, right? So you need to have a people to really understand all those things and work on that. And of course, if you don't have enough manpower, you can always reach out to people like Amol, like Joseph, right? So from vendor, from the consulting companies. And my tip for people really is coming to the event like this often and listen to the insights from our industry experts. So they have all kinds of use cases because they experience so many things. And also they can tell you what's new, what's cool, and where the industry is going. Because a lot of new things can resolve your old problems, right? So you don't need to, if you don't have if you're only in the old container, so you probably can, it's a deadlock, right? So it's always like that. You have to have something to break it. So that's my tip for that. All right, so that's pretty much for our panel discussion. So I really enjoying this talk, and hopefully we can learn more from you guys in the near future.
Thank you for having me, Bryan and Joseph. It was great joining you on this talk.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Bryan. Love to be here. Love to join these. Definitely listen in. Check out the other sessions as well. Amol, it was great working with you, and hopefully we can in the future as well.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Looking forward to it.
All right, cool. That's all for today's panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye for now.
Bye.